Warden James A. Johnston hung up the phone and stared at the paperwork on his desk. For the first time in his 14-year career running the most secure prison in America, he said something that would have gotten him fired if anyone heard it. "That man has more power on this island than I do." The man he was talking about was Bumpy Johnson, prisoner number 1117, and in just 18 months he had turned Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary into his personal kingdom. It was March 15th, 1954, 2:30 in the afternoon. Bumpy was sitting in the prison yard, back against the concrete wall, eyes scanning the 200 inmates around him. He wore standard-issue gray prison uniform, but somehow it looked tailored. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes missed nothing. Every movement, every conversation, every tension in the yard registered in that calculating mind. To his right sat Willie the Fish Jackson, serving 25 to life for armed robbery. To his left, Raymond Quick Lewis, in for murder one. But these weren't just inmates sitting with Bumpy Johnson. They were his cabinet, his advisors, his enforcers, and every single one of them called him Mr. Johnson. 3 months earlier, December 1953, when Bumpy first walked through those steel doors, Alcatraz was controlled by the Aryan Brotherhood. Tommy the Beast Sullivan ran the white inmates. Carlos El Muerte Rodriguez controlled the Latinos, and Big Mike Washington, all 6'8" and 300 pounds of him, ruled the black inmates with his fists. The prison had an unofficial but absolute hierarchy. The guards controlled the cells and the corridors, the inmates controlled the yard, the mess hall and the workshops, and whoever controlled the strongest gang controlled the contraband, the gambling, the protection rackets, and most importantly, who lived and who died. Bumpy Johnson changed all of that in 18 months. The first sign that things were different came in January 1954. Big Mike Washington, the undisputed king of the black inmates, walked up to Bumpy during lunch. The entire mess hall went quiet. 400 hardened criminals stopped eating, stopped talking, stopped breathing. They knew what was coming. The new fish was about to get broken in. Big Mike stood behind Bumpy's chair. He was enormous, hands like sledgehammers, scars covering his knuckles from a decade of prison fights. He'd killed 3 men inside, 2 more on the outside. His voice, when he spoke, rumbled like distant thunder. "Boy, you're sitting at my table." Bumpy didn't turn around. He continued eating his mashed potatoes, cutting his meatloaf with careful precision. The fork scraped against the metal tray. Scrape, 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 scrape. "I said you're sitting at my table." This time, Bumpy set down his fork. He picked up his napkin, wiped his mouth carefully, then turned in his chair, slowly, deliberately. When he looked up at Big Mike Washington, there was something in his eyes that made the giant pause. "I heard you the first time," Bumpy said quietly. "Now let me tell you something. This isn't your table anymore. This isn't your mess hall anymore. And if you ever call me boy again, you won't be anybody's problem anymore." The mess hall was so quiet, you could hear the kitchen fans humming. Big Mike's face went red, then purple. His massive hands clenched into fists. This 5'9" man had just disrespected him in front of 400 inmates. There was only one way this could end. Big Mike swung first, a right hook that could have knocked down a wall. It never landed. Bumpy moved like liquid mercury. He slipped the punch, came up inside Mike's guard, and drove his elbow into the giant's solar plexus. Big Mike folded like a paper bag. As he doubled over, gasping for air, Bumpy grabbed the back of his head and slammed it down onto the metal table. Once, twice, 3 times, Big Mike hit the floor unconscious, blood pooling around his shattered nose. Bumpy sat back down and resumed eating his meatloaf. That was the moment. Everyone knew. The old order was dead. The king was dead. Long live the king. But Bumpy Johnson didn't become the king of Alcatraz through violence alone. Any animal can fight. What made Bumpy different was that he understood something the other inmates didn't. Power isn't about being the toughest. Power is about being indispensable. Within 2 months, Bumpy had reorganized the entire prison economy. The gambling operation that had been chaotic, violent, and unpredictable under Big Mike became efficient, organized, and profitable under Bumpy. Instead of rival gangs fighting over scraps, Bumpy created territories, quotas, and profit-sharing agreements. The white inmates got the cigarette trade, the Latinos controlled the prison-made alcohol, the blacks ran the numbers game. But everyone paid tribute to Bumpy Johnson, not because they feared him, although they did, because they needed him. When disputes arose between gangs, they didn't settle it with knives in dark corners anymore. They brought their problems to Bumpy. He became the mediator, the judge, the final authority. His decisions were final, his word was law, and his protection was absolute. Even the guards began to respect him. Guard Captain Frank Morrison had been working Alcatraz for 8 years. He'd seen tough inmates before, but Bumpy was different. When Morrison walked through the yard, inmates usually either avoided eye contact or stared with naked hostility. But when Bumpy looked at him, there was something else: recognition, professional courtesy, one authority acknowledging another. It started small. Bumpy would nod respectfully when Morrison passed. If there was trouble brewing in the yard, Bumpy would catch Morrison's eye and shake his head slightly. No trouble today. It was handled. After 3 months of this, Morrison realized what was happening. Bumpy Johnson was helping him do his job. The yard was calmer, the inmates were more disciplined, and violent incidents had dropped 70% since Bumpy took over. But it wasn't just respect that Bumpy commanded from the guards, it was something more valuable: information. Every guard had debts, had problems, had secrets. Guard Tony Peschetti owed money to bookies on the outside. Guard Robert Hayes was cheating on his wife with a secretary in San Francisco. Guard William Murphy was skimming money from the commissary fund. Bumpy knew all of it, because Bumpy made it his business to know everything about everyone who had power over him. He didn't blackmail the guards, he didn't threaten them. Instead, he solved their problems. When Tony Peschetti's gambling debts reached $3,000 and the collectors were threatening to break his legs, Bumpy arranged for the debt to be paid. How? Through his network on the outside. One phone call during family visiting day, and the problem disappeared. When Robert Hayes' wife started getting suspicious about his afternoon absences, Bumpy provided him with alibis, work emergencies that required Hayes to stay late at the prison, documented emergencies that his wife could verify. When William Murphy got caught skimming by the federal auditors, Bumpy made sure the books balanced. Money from the inmate fund, carefully redistributed to cover Murphy's theft. In return, the guards became Bumpy's eyes and ears. They told him which inmates were planning trouble. They warned him about surprise cell searches. They let him know when the warden was planning new security measures. Within 6 months, Bumpy Johnson wasn't just running the inmates, he was running half the guard staff. That's when Warden James A. Johnston realized he had a problem. Johnston had been running Alcatraz since 1940. He'd seen every kind of inmate: bank robbers, murderers, kidnappers, mobsters, psychopaths, but he'd never seen anyone who could turn America's most secure prison into their personal empire. The reports crossing his desk painted a picture that should have been impossible. Violent incidents down 70%, inmate complaints down 80%, guard efficiency up 60%. By every measurable metric, Bumpy Johnson was making Alcatraz run better. But Johnston understood what others didn't. A well-run prison under an inmate's control was infinitely more dangerous than a chaotic prison under the warden's control. The federal inspectors were asking questions. How was one inmate able to exert so much influence? Why were the guards so deferential? What kind of operation was Johnston really running? And then came the phone call that changed everything. March 10th, 1954, 9:15 p.m. Johnston was at home, eating dinner with his wife, when the phone rang. It was his secretary at the prison. "Sir, you need to see tomorrow's mail delivery manifest. Can't it wait until morning?" "Sir, prisoner 1117 received 17 letters today, all from different cities: New York, Chicago, Detroit, Miami, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, all postmarked the same day. Johnston set down his fork. What kind of letters? We can't tell, sir. They're coded. But, sir, there's something else. 3 of the return addresses are from known associates of Meyer Lansky. 2 more are from Frank Costello's organization. Johnston felt his blood go cold. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just running Alcatraz. He was running his criminal empire from inside the most secure prison in America. The next morning, Johnston called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. Captain Morrison, Deputy Warden Miller, Chief of Security Williams, and the prison psychologist, Dr. Renard, sat around the conference table in Johnston's office. "Gentlemen, we have a situation," Johnston began. "Prisoner Johnson has turned this facility into his headquarters. He's coordinating criminal activities, controlling inmates and staff, and essentially operating a shadow administration within these walls." Captain Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, with respect, Johnson has actually made our jobs easier. The yard is quiet, the inmates are manageable, and we haven't had a major incident in months." Johnston's eyes went cold. "Captain, are you suggesting we allow an inmate to run this prison?" "No, sir. I'm just saying that maybe there's a way to work with him that benefits everyone." "There is no working with criminals, Captain. There is only control or chaos. And right now, he controls this prison, not me." Deputy Warden Miller leaned forward. "What do you suggest, sir?" Johnston opened a file folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. On it was a photograph and a criminal history. The photograph showed a thin, wiry man with dead eyes and scars covering his hands and forearms. Antonio Reyes, also known as the Blade, serving life without parole for multiple homicides, arrived yesterday from Leavenworth. According to his psychological profile, he's a sociopath with severe impulse control issues. He's killed 6 men in various prisons, 3 with improvised knives, 2 with his bare hands, 1 with a fork. The room went quiet. Reyes has no loyalty to anyone, no political affiliations, and no friends. He kills because he enjoys it, and he's going to solve our Bumpy Johnson problem. Dr. Renard looked alarmed. "Sir, you can't be suggesting." "I'm not suggesting anything, doctor. I'm simply placing a dangerous predator in the same environment as our problem inmate. Whatever happens after that is unfortunate but inevitable." What Johnston didn't know was that Bumpy Johnson had been expecting Antonio Reyes for 3 days. Every inmate transfer went through the prison's administrative office. Every administrative office memo was typed by Secretary Helen Walsh. And Secretary Helen Walsh's husband owed $5,000 to a bookie named Sal Torino. Sal Torino worked for Frank Costello. Frank Costello received letters from Bumpy Johnson twice a week. By the time Antonio Reyes stepped off the prison transport boat on March 11th, Bumpy already knew his criminal history, his psychological profile, his preferred killing methods, and most importantly, his one weakness. Antonio Reyes was a killer, but he was also a heroin addict. Bumpy had been planning for this moment since his first week in Alcatraz. He'd cultivated relationships, not just with inmates and guards, but with the prison medical staff. Dr. Patricia Henley, the prison physician, had a morphine addiction that she thought she'd hidden successfully. Bumpy not only knew about it, he'd been supplying her with stolen medical supplies to feed her habit. In return, Dr. Henley provided Bumpy with something infinitely more valuable than drugs. She provided him with pure pharmaceutical-grade heroin, medical grade, uncut, powerful enough to kill a man with a single injection. When Antonio Reyes arrived in the yard on his first day, he was already going through withdrawal. His hands shook slightly, his eyes were bloodshot. He'd been clean for the 3-day transport, and his body was screaming for a fix. Bumpy approached him during afternoon recreation. Not directly, that would have been too obvious. Instead, he sent Willie Jackson. "New fish," Willie said casually, sitting down next to Reyes on the concrete bleachers. "Word is you're hurting." Reyes's eyes snapped to Willie's face. "What's it to you?" "Maybe nothing, maybe everything. Depends on what you need." Willie pulled a small packet from his pocket, pure white powder in a folded piece of paper. Reyes's pupils dilated immediately. "What do you want for it?" "Conversation. With the boss." 5 minutes later, Antonio Reyes was sitting across from Bumpy Johnson in the shadow of the guard tower. The packet of heroin sat on the concrete between them. "You know why you're here," Bumpy said. It wasn't a question. Reyes nodded. "Johnston wants you dead. Thinks I'm crazy enough to do it." "Are you?" Reyes looked at the heroin packet, then at Bumpy's calm, calculating face. "Depends on what you're offering." "Life? I already got life, without parole." "No," Bumpy said quietly. "You got existence. I'm offering life." Bumpy leaned forward. "You kill me, Johnston throws you in solitary for the rest of your sentence. 23 hours a day in a 6x8 cell until you die. No yard time, no visitors, no human contact except guards who will spit in your food." He pointed to the heroin packet. "And no drugs, ever. You'll die sick, alone and forgotten." Reyes was listening now. "But if you work for me, you get protection, respect, and all the pharmaceutical-grade heroin you can handle. Plus, I get you out of here. Nobody gets out of Alcatraz." Bumpy smiled. "Nobody's tried to get out with my resources." For the next hour, Bumpy laid out a plan that was so audacious, so complex, and so carefully orchestrated that Antonio Reyes understood he was talking to the most dangerous man in America. The plan wasn't just about killing Warden Johnston. It was about taking complete control of Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, turning the most secure prison in the world into Bumpy Johnson's personal fortress. Phase 1. Eliminate Johnston, not through violence, through embarrassment. Bumpy had been collecting evidence of corruption, abuse, and financial irregularities for 18 months. He had documented proof that Johnston was skimming money from the prison budget, taking bribes from wealthy inmates' families, and covering up guard brutality incidents. But more importantly, Bumpy had evidence that Johnston was planning to murder a federal prisoner. Reyes was going to be the proof. Phase 2. Control the replacement warden. Bumpy already knew who was next in line: Deputy Warden Robert Miller. Miller was ambitious, pragmatic, and secretly homosexual in an era when that could destroy a career. Bumpy knew about Miller's relationship with a male secretary in San Francisco because he made it his business to know everything. Phase 3. Transform Alcatraz from a prison into a headquarters. With the right warden in place, Bumpy could turn his cell block into an office, the visiting room into a conference center, and the mail room into a communication hub for his criminal empire. It was brilliant. It was impossible. It was exactly what Bumpy Johnson had been planning since the day he arrived. But first, they had to deal with Warden Johnston. On March 15th, the same day Johnston hung up the phone and admitted Bumpy had more power than he did, Antonio Reyes walked into the warden's office, not as an inmate requesting a meeting, but as a federal informant reporting a crime. "Sir, I need to report a conspiracy." Johnston looked up from his paperwork. "What kind of conspiracy, Reyes?" "Prisoner Johnson approached me yesterday. He offered me drugs, protection, and money if I would kill you." Johnston's blood went cold. This was exactly what he'd hoped for, but he couldn't let Reyes know that. "That's a very serious accusation, Reyes. Do you have proof?" Reyes pulled out the packet of heroin Willie Jackson had given him. "He gave me this as down payment. Said there would be more after the job was done." Johnston stared at the drugs. Pure white powder, pharmaceutical quality, definitely not something that could be manufactured in the prison workshops. "Where did he get this?" "Don't know, sir, but he's got a lot more, and he's got guards helping him. Captain Morrison, for one." Johnston felt his world shifting. If Bumpy had corrupted Morrison, if he had access to medical-grade narcotics, if he was planning murder, this was bigger than a prison gang. This was a complete security breakdown. "Reyes, I need you to go back to Johnson. Tell him you're interested in his offer. Get more evidence. Record conversations if you can. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir, but I want protection. If he finds out I'm working with you, he'll kill me." "You'll have protection, round-the-clock guard supervision, when necessary." What Johnston didn't know was that every word of this conversation was being reported to Bumpy Johnson within the hour. Guard Captain Morrison, who Johnston thought was corrupted by Bumpy, was actually Bumpy's partner. Morrison had agreed to work with Bumpy, not because he was blackmailed, but because he recognized that Bumpy was making his job easier and his life better. By evening count that day, Bumpy knew everything. He knew Johnston was using Reyes as an informant. He knew Johnston planned to build a case against him, and he knew Johnston was planning to have him transferred to a maximum security psychiatric facility where he would disappear forever. But Bumpy also knew something Johnston didn't. Federal Bureau of Prisons Inspector General Harold Matthews was arriving for a surprise inspection in 3 days. Matthews was conducting the inspection because of anonymous letters sent to the Bureau headquarters in Washington. Letters detailing corruption, abuse, and security failures at Alcatraz. Letters signed by a concerned federal employee, but written in Bumpy Johnson's careful handwriting. When Inspector General Matthews arrived on March 18th, he found exactly what the anonymous letters had described. Evidence of financial irregularities in the prison accounts, documented instances of guard brutality being covered up, and most damaging of all, proof that Warden Johnston was planning the murder of a federal prisoner. Antonio Reyes, coached by Bumpy but unknown to Johnston, had been documenting every conversation he'd had with the warden. Not just the conversation about becoming an informant, but follow-up meetings where Johnston had explicitly discussed killing Bumpy Johnson and making it look like an accident. When Matthews interviewed Reyes, the story was damning. Johnston had recruited a known killer to murder another inmate. He had promised protection for the killer and concealment of the crime, and he had done all of this in writing because Reyes had been keeping detailed notes of their meetings. But the final nail in Johnston's coffin came from an unexpected source, Dr. Patricia Henley. Dr. Henley, the prison physician with the morphine addiction that Bumpy had been feeding, was facing federal drug charges. When Inspector General Matthews confronted her with evidence of missing medical supplies, she broke down and confessed everything. She confessed to stealing morphine for her own use. She confessed to providing drugs to inmates, but most importantly, she confessed that Warden Johnston had known about her addiction for 6 months and had been blackmailing her to keep quiet. Johnston wasn't just corrupt, he was using a drug-addicted doctor to maintain his control over the prison medical system. Within 48 hours, Warden James A. Johnston was suspended from duty pending a full federal investigation. Within a week, he was indicted on federal charges of conspiracy, bribery, and planning the murder of a federal prisoner. Deputy Warden Robert Miller was promoted to acting warden. His first decision was to implement new policies recommended by Inspector General Matthews, policies that coincidentally gave inmates more privileges, more freedom of movement, and more access to communication with the outside world. Miller's second decision was to transfer Antonio Reyes to a minimum security federal prison in California, where he would serve the rest of his sentence in relative comfort. Miller's third decision was to assign Bumpy Johnson to a private cell with desk privileges so he could assist with the prison's new Inmate Advisory Council program. By April 1954, Bumpy Johnson was no longer just the king of Alcatraz. He was the unofficial deputy warden, operating out of a furnished cell that looked more like an office, with direct access to the telephone system and regular meetings with federal officials. When Inspector General Matthews submitted his final report to the Bureau of Prisons, it included a recommendation that the Alcatraz prison model be reformed to emphasize inmate self-governance and conflict resolution as pioneered by exemplary prisoners who demonstrate leadership qualities. The example he cited was prisoner 1117, Ellsworth Raymond, Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy had turned the most secure prison in America into his personal kingdom, not through violence or escape, but by making himself indispensable to the very system designed to contain him. When reporters later asked how one man could transform Alcatraz so completely, former Captain Morrison, who was promoted to deputy warden under Miller, said something that became legend among federal prison officials. Bumpy Johnson didn't break the rules of Alcatraz. He became the rules. By 1957, 3 years after becoming the unofficial ruler of Alcatraz, Bumpy was released on parole, not because he served his time, but because federal officials determined that his rehabilitation and leadership qualities made him a model candidate for early release. He walked off Alcatraz Island the same way he'd walked on, quietly, calmly, and with a plan that was already in motion. The kingdom of Alcatraz had served its purpose. Now it was time to reclaim the kingdom of Harlem. But that's another story. The story of how a man who turned the most secure prison in the world into his personal fortress came home to find his real empire waiting for him. Some men are broken by prison, others are made by it. But Bumpy Johnson, he turned prison into a palace, and when he left, even the federal government admitted they'd never seen anything like him. The warden who tried to kill him was serving federal time himself. The doctor who tried to resist him became his ally. The killer who was sent to eliminate him became his enforcer. And the prison that was supposed to contain him became the foundation of his legend. That's not just survival. That's mastery. And Bumpy Johnson was the master of them all.